Okay, so Samantha Albert,
Here.
Christy Belton,
I'm here.
Christina Bury, Commissioner Hillary Cooper, Pat Dorsey, Paige Lewis, Director Matt McCombs,
Present.
Mark Morgan,
Here.
Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally,
Present.
Commissioner Ben Tisdale.
There he is.
Great.
Good morning.
And Sylvan Whiteskunk. So it looks like we do have 6 members, and that now makes quorum, which is great.
Great. Thank you all for being here today. I hope you have had a chance to look at the minutes. I welcome a motion to approve the minutes.
I so move.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you so much. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approval of the minutes, please say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Wonderful. Thank you so much. The minutes are approved. Great. Let's have an update and discussion on the interim committee meeting on September 28th and input on the legislation language. I hope you all had a chance to review that, at least the first 3 bills. And we did have a wonderful meeting. Again, thanks to Representative Cutter for sponsoring that bill and coming and informing us, and then also sharing at our last Forest Health meeting last week. And as a side note, Angela, I just hope, if in case I forget, because we have a big county commissioner meeting starting at 10 o'clock today, and my head's kind of racing with a lot of things. I'd like to just see if we can put up the dates again for suggested meetings next year at the end of the meetings. I thought I'd taken a screenshot of that and I can't find it. And I just want to kind of have that for my notes again. If you wouldn't mind at the end of the meeting, that'd be great. So I'm not I was wondering if Director McCombs, you've been attending those meetings, and I thought maybe you can kind of kick this off with a couple of those conversations because you were there that day. And so I was hoping you might help me lead this discussion today.
Sure. So help. So our goal was to just review these bills and their potential impacts. Is that I'll be honest, I'm not totally tracking what we're trying to cover today.
Oh, I apologize. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
So we're just going to, there was a couple of, especially the one about the workforce bill, there were several bills that were combined, and we were just going to look through them today and start to provide some feedback on maybe any language changes or things that we might suggest to help kind of start that stakeholder kind of input process for us to kind of provide some input or recommendations for the legislation. As you all know, and I certainly this last session with a couple of bills that I worked on, a lot of things get changed and tweaked, and so we thought we'd just go ahead and start that as an initial discussion, just for kind of, even if we just get through 1 or 2 of them today, just to kind of, they're really well done, but we just want to make sure kind of our intent or what we hope to see was well represented. So I think there was some concerns brought up at our Forest Health Council meeting last week. And so just wanted to have that conversation. So we should just go to bill number 4 and just kind of start there.
Now I'm tracking. So Courtney, do you happen to have the bill descriptions as passed out of committee handy that we could pull up as a reference? And then there's Angela, just put it in the chat, but it might be helpful to have it available as we go through. So I guess as opposed, I mean, I can sort of review them based on, I mean, the synopsises of the bill are pretty concise, and the language currently is not very detailed. So there's I'm assuming there's an expectation that some changes will be made between interim and general. But are you pulling that up just so I can?
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, I'll pull it up here, Courtney, so you don't have to worry.
I have it. I'm just doing it side by side. I don't know how, if that's the hard part, is trying to. And
So-
Angela and anyone else can pipe in. I mean, just raise your hand and we could just have this group discussion, but
Yeah, no,
thank you.
let's just address the concerns as they come up. But essentially, this bill did combine a couple ideas that had been working through the process, and so that was both the internship as well as program that the State Forest Service would establish, as well as establishing additional forestry programs in Colorado College was named, and I think there was some concern sort of about like having one institution named and then having the broader board of community colleges in Colorado named as well. So there's going to be some work, I think, on trying to figure out exactly where the best fit is, or do we give the community college board some discretion on where it might be, in the best fit. So I think that was some of the offline conversations that I had, but ultimately it just, this creates a funding mechanism for both outreach to people in a pre-college setting, and then an internship for folks interested in forestry programming, and then establishes funding to allow the community college system as well as Colorado Mountain College to establish programs. So I guess does everybody have a pretty good understanding of how this bill came together?
I had a couple questions.
Sure.
And
Ms.
so
Morgan?
do I.
One was just a suggestion. It directs your program to, and the wording in the bill, Forest Service, Department of Natural Resources, Fire Prevention and Control, the Department of Public Safety and Timber Industry. There's no mention of partnering with the community college system. That would, your development program for your high school program, I would think you would want some input from those guys on what you're going to put in there for your materials for your high school program. And then my other concern on that bill was I'm trying to track with, you mentioned it already earlier, Matt, the specific mention of Colorado Mountain College. Is that because they have opportunity now for four-year degrees there, or specifically because other community colleges here? I'm going to bang the drum for Front Range because they've been in existence for 30 years and they run a great program. But also I'd heard that Pueblo, and so some people were concerned about whether this was a bill to create a program at Colorado Mountain College, or whether this was a bill to enhance all programs. And I had that same concern.
And I've heard similar concerns.
And that was brought up in committee. There was a question by a member, I can't exactly remember who, around like, where did Colorado Mountain College come from? And I'll be transparent. I don't really know.
That's fine.
I'm not sure exactly how that came into being. But then there was additional questions in committee about, where would this be focused when they just refer to the community college system at large. And I think there was some advocacy for programs in the Southeast, and then of course this group has been talking rather targetedly throughout our discussion of this concept about expanding services or programming at Front Range. So I think that there's certainly, if we come to some conclusions about where we think geographically or perhaps the best opportunity is, then I think this body could provide that recommendation for narrowing, or we could ask for a broader, or I guess give the community college system the opportunity to sort of source where they think the best bang for the buck would be, or the highest degree of success might occur.
The rest of the wording in your bill was fine with me in the sense that it said all of these programs, depending upon student need, interest in the area. I thought all those were excellent criteria that was to be used, and that's why I wondered why there was a separate inclusion. We got to go forward together here and give everybody an opportunity. And if these community colleges want to grow a program, so much the better. Get it going, and we got to provide for the success of the ones that we already have. That was my only concern.
So I'd like to add on to that, and then Christy had her hand up, and then Commissioner Tisdale. But I agree with you, Mr. Morgan. I feel like it's great that we make sure we're inclusive and including everyone to have the opportunity to develop this. But I was kind of wondering why Colorado Mountain College was called out, and I assumed that it was because maybe they have now a 4-year degree. I didn't know that, but I think to have some successes, and we have already a very successful program, I wanted to make sure that we're putting the energy behind. We needed to have this produce this workforce now. And so there might be this tiered approach where the programs that are already running and successful, that we help them expand to reach capacity, and then have the second tier having those programs that need help development if they want to do that. Because I'm afraid if, we kind of give too much to everyone, the other programs can't scale up that we need to do, and it could delay that workforce. So if we had kind of that push to help those programs already up and successful, and then have the second tier to help those that want to start one in the other parts of the state, I think is kind of what I was thinking. I don't know if that's even possible. So just that's adding on to Mr. Morgan's comments. I had a kind of similar concerns. So I will, Christy, if you want to voice your comments now.
Thank you. So my question is, does this sunset, or is there a timeline on this so that colleges, Jody, going back to like your tiered approach conversation just now, I would assume it'll take a while for these colleges to establish these programs and recruit instructors and those kind of things. Is there a timeline for funding on this bill? Can they count on multiple years of funding?
So yes, there are sunset dates for each sort of section of the bill potentially. So for instance, the Colorado Mountain College section 6, that section is repealed effective July 1st, 2025. So I think the idea there is to sort of push them into making these investments within the next couple of years. I can go back up and look at at section 5 and see if it's the same.
Okay. That's okay. That answers my question. And then my next question would be, is that enough time? And I don't know. I don't have any opinion one way or the other.
Mr.
Yeah, it's probably a good question for the colleges.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
I see it as it's kind of a pilot, somewhat of a pilot program. Whichever colleges want it, it needs to happen where the staffing availability is, and the interest in the coursework is, and the need is located. So somehow to describe that in the bill, I don't want to hardwire in anything that says it must be at Red Rocks or it must be at wherever. It should occur where the greatest interest and need and availability is, and it can expand.
Is there that way to like with that section for Colorado Mountain College, can be, any college with existing successful programs, tier 1, and that repealed at this date to kind of, like you, I think, I don't know who said that, kind of force or strongly encourage the scaling up, and then the second tier of any other community colleges who want to try to initiate and start a program like in Southern Part, or then we say Pueblo Community College wanted to look at this. I'm just wondering about that, because I think what I understood is that some of these programs are ready to scale up and ready to increase the capacity. How can we supercharge that with this bill and then also bring everyone else along at the same time? Is that possible even with this language or this bill?
So yes, I believe so. So if you look at, so this is section 5.3a, subject to available appropriations, the board may approve the expansion of an existing forestry program and the creation of a new forestry program within the community college system, blah, blah, blah. So this is basically the section that, says it could be anybody, and it could either be expansion or creation of a new one. And then the next section is the one specific to Colorado Mountain College. So it could be as simple as striking that Colorado Mountain College section and consolidating those resources into this section.
Yeah, I saw that. That's what I think was confusing, because we have that section, but when they added the Colorado Mountain College, it felt like it kind of pulled that out to kind of give it extra emphasis. And I think that's what's creating the concern. So I'd be very curious who wrote that in there, just curious. So.
And I'm not
sorry
super clear on that either. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Christy.
Since I'm on the phone, I can't raise my hand. So I wanted to just have another question before we leave this bill when it's appropriate.
Yeah, sure thing. And any other suggestions on this community college section?
No, I think that sounds like that's the biggest comment concern from the majority of us. Would everyone agree on that?
Yes.
Great. Christy, what was your next comment?
Just one other question. I think I'm using my notes because I read through these bills yesterday. And I think this bill also talks about interns. And I'm just wondering if housing can be included or is intended to be included in that cost share. So if an employer is paying to house the interns, are they able to recoup 50% of those costs as well?
Great question.
That's a great question. I don't know what those costs would be. I guess that would be something. What do you think, Director McCombs?
Well, the internship programs that we currently run in partnership with CSU, there is discretion to, if you have the funding, to provide a stipend or an allotment for housing to offset costs for the intern themselves. But it doesn't go to like the institution or the entity that might be providing the internship opportunity. It typically goes to whoever's sponsoring the internship. So I think, I think that there is flexibility. I mean, how we build the internship program, we can create flexibility to allow for, as funding is available, to offset costs associated with reasonable admin or overhead. So, but we could potentially call it out if we think it's important, because that is a huge challenge. I mean, the way our philosophy right now is we're actually working with all of the educational institutions across the state in the summer and trying to hustle them to give us, anywhere between $15 to $20 a day in their unused dorms to house our interns. And that's at the institutions all across Colorado. And they're typically amenable. And that's how we've been able to cover costs for some of our interns across the state in high rent areas. But I don't know, do folks think that we need to call that out specifically, acknowledging that can be a barrier to success?
And just for reference, the current language is the actual cost includes the wages paid to the intern, a reasonable allocation of fixed overhead expenses, and all incidental costs directly related to the internship. So I think that leaves some room for interpretation by the State Forest Service, but I do think it's a good question whether it needs to be called out.
I think we should ask if we should call it out. I agree with you. I was wondering about that as we were discussing, if that gave enough flexibility or discretion within that. But I think if we ask that question just to clarify, and I see Mr. Morgan has his hand up.
Yeah, I think that's a real important issue. One side of me says that you should address it. The other side of me says that every time you keep making things more and more restrictive, then that restricts your ability to be creative and find solutions. So I guess I would be inclined to not, because these internships are going to be reviewed as to who gets them in your board, and you're going to submit a package. Well, what may be appropriate in one place may not be appropriate in another. And I guess I will defer to that review board that's going to be in place for the State Forest Service as to whether it's reasonable or not. I think we have to trust their judgment on this. So I would suggest not changing it and let them make their choices, but that's my suggestion.
Director McCombs.
That language is plenty wide for us to interpret housing costs. Those are absolutely traditional overhead and incidental expenses. So if I were to interpret this bill as written, we have plenty of room to include housing.
Cool. Well, then I think maybe would everyone agree we're okay with that language then?
Yes.
I'm having trouble since we have this on screen, and I appreciate it having on screen. If you're raising your hand, I can see, but Christy and all of you, I can't. So thank you for speaking up. And I think if you don't see me kind of recognizing your hand up or something, if you can put it in the chat, because I can see that as well. So any other parts of this bill to discuss? Great, let's move on to the next one.
Here, I'll just pull it up.
I'm just being mindful of time too, so because we have some other things on the agenda. So if we don't get through all of these today, it's not critical. I want to kind of, so I'm going to probably call the agenda timing, and so we can get through the last couple of things just on our time. We have plenty. They don't have plenty, but we have some time to jump on that. But I definitely wanted to discuss that bill right up for sure. So thank you. So here's this other bill.
So there was some conversation at the end of the committee hearing about acknowledging that this this includes in it. So this is a rerun of a bill, I think, from last session. That we might be able to collapse the internship component of this bill into the bill that we just discussed, and then secondarily that the tax incentive piece, just sort of stands as it is. So any adjustments, I would say that this group could recommend, it would be helpful, I think, to recommend that they collapse the internship component of this bill into the bill we just discussed. I think that the committee and the sponsors would be amenable to that. But as far as the tax incentives for the timber industry, I'll leave it up to this group to provide any feedback.
I'll echo that. That's exactly my comments on this bill altogether, was to collapse the internship into the other bill. It seemed like we're putting on two separate ones, and to make sure that internship program gets supercharged, I just felt like we should just pile that all into that bill. So I agree with you completely, Director McCombs. Mr. Morgan.
I agree totally, and for a slightly different reason. They're two completely separate things in reality. And the other one is that those internships also act as kind of a funding source for students trying to earn their way through school. So I believe it very much belongs in the workforce development bill, because that's an additional hook to attract students in if they know there's an internship program there for them.
I agree. Any other comments on this bill? Wow, you guys are great. We're cruising through. This is awesome. Thanks for doing your homework and reading ahead. Let's put up the next one.
So this is the nursery bill, Jody.
Yes.
Yeah. The committee had some, I don't know what they were thinking that day, but there were some interesting questions on this. They had, I would characterize them kind of as electioneering or a little bit of grandstanding, but
yeah,
it's a good bill.
I watched that discussion too virtually, and I was very interested in that. So Director McCombs and then Mr. Morgan.
So just real quick. So one thing that we will be doing on our side is working with the sponsor and to amend the so the way the fiscal note came forward, it wasn't inclusive of the total need and ask. It was actually some call outs, some specific line items from the previous bill that we ran last year. And for whatever reason, the fiscal note went forward without some needed adjustments. And so the ask will actually be different and more inclusive of the total need. And we'll have more clarity on that once this assessment we're trying to kick off here in the next month is completed, and hoping to have that done before the session. So we'll be working with the sponsors external to this process. I guess the only thing I might suggest this group could do would be to be supportive of that additional need if you are. It's right around 5.4 million as opposed to, I think, right around 2, which is what this bill had originally requested. I'll just give you some background. Yeah, it's really hard to go to the legislature with a pocket full of money and say, I'd like another pocket full of money. But we're also very hopeful that the modernization of the nursery can be completed in one fell swoop. because there's an economy of scale there. There's an economy of planning effort. And then also we push back against the potential for increased costs associated with competing, or excuse me, with inflation and other things. So you heard me make that argument in committee, and we'll be working one-to-one outside of this effort to try to get that inclusive language of the total need in the bill that's actually runs in the legislature. So any thoughts on that?
I'm supportive. I know it's going to be, after that discussion, I am sure it's going to be very specific, and I think that needs assessment study will be very helpful. So,
Yeah.
Mr. Morgan and then Commissioner Tisdale.
I'm very supportive of it for this reason. I think the need for the nursery here has changed from an industry standpoint in a harvesting situation. All of the timber that we harvest is almost always naturally regenerated. So, direct relationship, the nursery isn't going to plant trees that industry is going to harvest. That's not going to happen. But because of the huge wildfires that we've had, for public support and social license to do our work, these people, they want action right now, and they want to feel like they're doing something positive. And most of these seedlings, my guess, will go back in on private ground. And I think that's absolutely critical to have that, to get your public license to do the forestry work that we need to do. So we are supportive of this for that particular reason. And I think the other side of that, Director McCombs just already mentioned, anytime you got a construction project, it's way cheaper to do it all at once than it is to keep staging it up on a big job like that. Get the money, do the job right, and move on.
I agree. I agree with you. If you don't mind, Commissioner Tisdale, I just wanted to say real quick, I was up in the Camera Peak Bird Scar on private land with the Colorado Coalition for the Poudre Watershed and Poudre Valley REA, and they planted 450 trees. Unfortunately, they let me know about this too late, so I only could squeeze in like 4 hours, which was an hour and a half up, an hour and a half back. So you can tell how long I was up there. But there was a lot of social media coverage on that and showing the trees, and I think that's was very helpful to kind of show that the of getting in to restore the burn scar. So I think you're right, Mr. Morgan, just showing people that we're trying to recover up here, and I think that's other burn scars throughout the state. So I think it's important. Commissioner Tisdale, and then I'm at Director McCombs. Thank you for providing this information.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. I support this as well. Strong interest in reestablishing stuff after fires, and it actually came up. It was one of the things that came up during the Sims fire meeting the other night. The affected landowners really do want to reestablish some stuff that was destroyed. But what I remember, the other thing I recall from the committee discussion was they're looking for an sort of a supplemental piece of information from the State Forest Service regarding progress to date of what has happened with the funding that was allocated last year. So maybe if it would make sense, perhaps this council could help, or review that, or I don't know if that would be helpful to the process. If we could, I don't know if we'll have a time to do like a field trip or something, but when that supplemental information is ready, maybe we should see it and understand it.
So real quick, Jody. So I'll absolutely. So, and just so you guys know, like Senator Janal wants to come out. Senator Rankin wants to come out. Commissioner Senator McNally is going to be there. I've already, Director Gibbs. So a lot of folks that want to kind of see the nursery, and so it could be that we could all come together, right? So Forest Health Advisory Council folks could come at the same time those members are there, at the same time executive leadership from the administration is there. And knowing the governor's already been there, we could make a compelling argument and show you where those dollars are going to go. And the other piece I just want to make y'all aware of is that I am also actively pursuing millions of dollars of investment from the federal government and trying to land contracts associated with the huge effort that they have around reforestation and the funding that's available. I was with the National Association of State Foresters and all the executive leadership within state and private that are going to be managing those funds. And my pitch to them was open for business. Colorado is open for business, and we're looking for investment. And our seething capacity, and we have the land, the water, and infrastructure already in play, and we have leverage coming through the state legislature. So I'm hoping that I'll also be able to bring some leverage from the feds to the legislature to demonstrate that whatever investments they make are going to have immediate impacts in the enterprise component of the nursery's operations. And I'll just shush there, Madam Chair.
Great. I just, I'll put another plug. And Mr. Morgan, you can talk after. I just want to add, that's one of the reasons that I pushed and I kind of volunteered the tour of the nursery, but for having one of our meetings for the Forest Health Council next year to be up here in Larimer County. I just spent the afternoon yesterday up in the retreat, which is near Glenhaven Estes Park, that was ravaged by the lot of the Cameron Peak burn scars. Part of it's right up in Ed's Rock against Rocky National Park. And they're having flash flood after flash flood and getting the roads wiped out. And I got up there yesterday to see the progress, and the fire chief, all volunteer. They have learned a lot. They learned literally trial by fire. They did not know much about fire, and all volunteers up there, and they learned so much last year. They informed me yesterday they have completed a complete fire mitigation project with some support and advice from our OEM and the fire ship completely around their area by themselves, along with some other partners in Rubicon and Serve 6.8 organization. And I kind of said, what? You did what? You got it all done in a year and a half. So I think that's another success story of private landowners and folks coming together and doing this, and how this is kind of part of that landscape approach, is getting all hands on deck and everyone trying to do what we can. And they're looking to do some more planning up there too. And there's some mulching that's starting up there really up high. And you can see those areas. There's a spot where you can see way up top, and where that's federal land, and then there's state land, and then there's private, and it's all in one view shed. And so I have some ideas. So I'm hoping you guys will support coming up here. There's a lot we can show and talk about. And I've already talked to my county leadership. All of our buildings and all of our whatever resources, we're all in. So thank you, and Mr. Morgan.
Yeah. Director McCombs, I think you mentioned all the resources you have except the most important one. You have knowledge and experience. You're part of a land grant institution, and you have a 50-year success program in running a nursery. And I think that in itself is the single biggest. It takes so much to get the momentum going. And you guys have suffered some in the past right now, and I realize that, but you still have that. You have the knowledge and the experience and the research available right there. So I think that's an even bigger component than your physical resources that you can bring to the table.
Amen, Mr. Morgan. Amen.
Well said, Mr. Morgan. Okay, any other comments on this bill? All right, thank you all. So I'm going to suggest that we move on and leave the optional 2 bills for a later date. And let's move on to our next agenda item. And I'm going to have Angela take over that portion of that discussion, because we want to make sure that this being a lot of us have different hats, lots of different hats that we wear, which is great. And but we want to make sure we know which hat and which conversation we can have or not have as members of this council. So I was going to have Angela remind us all, and I know we probably all understand that, but I want to make sure we're clear, because as Brene Brown says, clear is kind, and make sure that there's no question about what our lanes and which hat we can wear or not wear at certain times. So if Angela, you wouldn't mind covering that piece, I appreciate you addressing that and appreciate you suggesting this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Shattuck McNally. So a couple things here, really just around expectations for agreeing to support or oppose bills that, as a full council, obviously as council members, you have the ability to sort of act autonomously at times, but recognizing that by being a council member, you've also agreed to represent the council generally, and be sort of aligned in good faith with the council if the full council does approve, support, or opposition for a bill. So with all of that said, in our bylaws, we need a 2/3 majority to vote to approve something. My proposal for how we move forward with sort of bill support or opposition is that this legislative committee would do just what you're doing now, basically come up with suggestions for revisions to bills. I think that as a committee, just as we did today, if you've come up with some suggestions, I would suggest that this committee votes to approve, suggestions that they all agree on. You vote to approve those, and then we basically send those edits or revisions to the full council for sort of the next full council meeting, whenever that is. The timing wise, once we get into the legislative session, this is going to get difficult, but if there are major substantive suggestions, then I do recommend that we share them with the full council and then get the full council's approval to support or oppose bills or offer amendments. And then, you would basically nominate somebody to present, at the legislature when these bills are in committee and provide those suggested edits, if that makes sense. So that's sort of the process that I'm envisioning. And it sort of probably goes without saying, but if the full council votes to approve certain bills, the expectation would be that no council member would then, say go and oppose a bill as sort of an individual, let's say. So that maybe seems pretty obvious, but I could see scenarios where, you have 2/3 of the council who do support a bill and then a member who doesn't. And I think we sort of have to have that conversation about what it means to sort of act in good faith as a member of the council. And we can have that conversation with the full council at a later time. But I just want to throw that out there. And then the other thing to just watch out for is around conflict of interest. So I could see this potentially being an issue. Mark Morgan, not to single you out, but a couple of the provisions of some of these bills would be beneficial to industry. And so I think we just need to be mindful of this. You've obviously, provided information that's led to the creation of some of these bills, but in terms of providing that supportive testimony as a council member, I think I'll work with Courtney and sort of Director Gibbs to draw up some guidance around conflict of interest, just so that we don't expose this council to, accusations of conflict of interest at work for certain members in terms of providing support for certain bills. So does that make sense? I know I'm sort of dancing around some of these issues, but.
Yeah, and I had one other question I had, and no, I agree. I think that makes sense. And I also I have two things I'd like to add. I suspected that was going to be some of the things you mentioned. So my first question is, when we have and vote for someone testifying in front of the legislature, I want to know if we should vote on maybe a team. I know because, when Director McCombs and I presented in front of the wildfire committees, I had some feedback and they liked how we kind of tag teamed each other and probably brought that kind of strength of showing kind of a council with a lot of different interests and strengths, because I think it also shows kind of that landscape support of these items. So I wanted to suggest that. And then secondly, when we have so let's say we have, I'll just call myself out, okay? There's some bills on, maybe I'm supporting with the Wildfire Commission. I should only wear my commissioner hat there and not do and I'm just assuming, and I'm just saying this as calling myself out, that I should not be in other bills calling myself as a Forest Health Council member. I'm only testifying as a commissioner and support of those bills. So unless we're coming to testify as a Forest Health Council member or chair as a legislative committee, I can only do that those times for those specific things that our whole council has supported. And at any other time, I'm going to not have say, well, I'm also a member of the Forest Health Council, because that might make that seem like the Forest Health Council is also supporting that. So I'm calling myself out. I knew that was what it needed to happen, but I'm just using myself as an example, that if I'm going to other bills, that I need to wear only that hat, and I can do that as an individual commissioner. So I just wanted to kind of call myself out, not calling myself out, but using myself as an example of something that I'm very aware that, which hat or which role I will be playing if I do, which I probably will, because I did several times last year. So I'm assuming that also is something we should be careful about.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, if you're going to testify on a bill that Forest Health Council hasn't really discussed or decided any support or opposition on, it's advisable not to cite yourself as a member of the council.
Great. Commissioner Tisdale and then Mr. Morgan.
Yeah, and thanks. When we had this discussion within the Fire Commission, we found, yes, if there is a position that the commission or the council has taken as an official position, absolutely you can cite that and your membership on that board. Occasionally it's useful to kind of just for credentials establishing in a committee for legislators that don't know you, to say, yes, I am a commissioner for this county, and yes, I'm on these other things, but today I am here in front of you to represent the official position of this entity. And that became an established okay practice within the Fire Commission when there were bills. And so that was kind of a pattern that we established, but generally you just want to make it absolutely clear if you're testifying whose position you are there to represent. It's okay to establish, it seemed okay to to also say, these are my other areas of interest, but that's not what I'm here for today.
Is everyone okay? And I agree with that. Is Angela, does that seem like that's fair? Like you can mention your kind of credentials just to kind of establish that you have some other knowledge and then just be very clear. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I
have
think that's excellent clarity, Ben. And we can draft up like a sentence just so folks have it in their back pocket,
I think that would be great.
Like, today I'm here, testifying on behalf of X.
I think that would be great just to have it's always great to have things in our back pockets for those times. Mr. Morgan, thank you for your patience.
No, that's fine. This comes up all the time, and differentiating who you're representing at that time and that day is excellent. And I think that's appropriate. The one thing that I'm looking for right now is that we have many more issues that unite us than divide us. And so I'm looking for positive issues. One thing we do in our Timber Industry Association meetings is we work hardest at promoting things where we can get unanimous consent. And so we try to do that and call it low-hanging fruit, call it whatever you want. If you can have an agreement and everybody supports it, and we will have controversial issues in the future. We'll have some very controversial ones, and people will be on different sides of it. But I think that if presenting a united front for momentum to get this group moving and getting something happening is real critical. And so in your explaining, who you're representing that day, I often try to make a differentiation between my personal interests. And if I see a question coming up, I try to pull the different members of the associations that I belong to in advance. And then I say, do you want me to act in your behalf for this or not act in your behalf for this? And I think that works pretty good. A lot of times they say, well, just leave that alone, or that's fine to do that. So I don't know if you guys have the ability to do that, but that works pretty good for us. If you can foresee what you're going to do, poll your members in advance, and then you can say who you're representing.
Okay, any other questions or concerns about that? I just figured it's better just to make sure we all are on the same page. So, wow, you guys, you make this easy. Thank you very much for that. Commissioner Tisdale, I think we have just a few minutes, unless you'd like to. I know we can't really look at the report that you just sent yesterday, but if you have just a few minutes, because I want to honor you and I both have a meeting at 10.
Sure.
But I know
and I see it on the agenda as retrofit information, which was something more related to the Fire Commission, but that's an interesting one too. But the Sims Fire Facilitated Learning Analysis was published yesterday. I sent out the document just earlier this morning. It was finally published. We did our meeting with the affected landowners on Wednesday night, and really some good lessons. And it's a big discussion about how to treat and how to approach prescribed burn going forward. And there are other sources of lessons, including the U.S. Forest Service end of the strategic pause and coming out of that with additional recommendations. But this FLA brought in some, essentially trying to treat prescribed burns with the same level of attention and staffing as wildfires receive, so that they more resources, more people to make sure that fire doesn't escape and so on. It's because it's getting more difficult, but also getting more important to do prescribed burns as climate changes, and it needs to be staffed appropriately and given and broadly supported by the communities that it occurs in, so that it continues to happen. And we can talk more about it at length, but it's that it is one of those true crossover areas between fire policy and forest health policy, and I think it probably deserves its own more than 3 minutes or 5 minutes. So let's.
Yeah, I apologize. I wasn't sure
That's okay.
exactly, and I should have communicated and understood exactly how long to time. But I'm also wondering, this sounds like a bigger conversation for the council as a whole. And I didn't know if that's something to suggest to the council as a whole, since I'm not
I think
sure.
it is. Yeah, it's going to, the Fire Commission has actually kind of retired the WUI subcommittee more or less on, and that's going through its legislative process, but we've stood up a new subcommittee on prescribed burns specifically, and that's starting to take some shape. It is one of those crossover areas, something that the Forest Health Council should also be involved in, I think, or at least having conversations. It's going to be a topic going forward. Matt?
Mr. Director McCombs and Mr. Morgan.
So real quick, yeah, I mean, and I think you saw myself and Executive Director Gibbs sort of not dancing, but saying, well, the Fire Commission's kind of working on this, and how to, and then, but you hear some of our other members in this group talking about, we aren't talking enough about prescribed. And I think that would be helpful is if we just declare that we will sort of seed around a little bit to the Fire Commission's prescribed fire subcommittee to let them move through this issue. And then as it's ripening, that maybe this group comes forward with some recommendations and or just support for whatever comes out of those prescribed fire subcommittee on the Fire Commission. Because I think it's going to just get muddy, and it's the same people in a lot of ways kind of having the conversation. And I also I'll just be totally transparent, I want DFPC to drive on this as well, and they are. And so that's just where I'm coming from. But at the same time, it's a critically important issue that we should at some point have a policy position on. But again, as it relates to developing legislative proposals and or fix around liability, smoke, staffing, that we might want to just declaratively cede that ground to Fire Commission subcommittee on prescribed fire until such time that we can weigh in on whatever it is that comes out of their work. So I'd love to hear some thoughts on that.
I kind of was thinking the same thing. I think it's something that I don't want to, I agree with you, muddy the water. It sounds like they're starting to gain some traction. And it sounds like if we, but I'd like to make sure we look at and come out and discuss what the recommendations are, because I do agree there's that crossover. But I think that, I think for us to jump in now might be too early, and maybe we should just, I agree with you. And I thought maybe the whole council should, we could have a meeting here and say we such the whole council having this discussion. And so that's where I kind of see our role, because I think the whole council should kind of have this conversation. So.
And the last thought I would just put in, and I don't know if this would be weird, Angela, Corey, you have to just tell me, but we could have the subcommittee from the Fire Commission come and brief the Forest Health Advisory Council. There's absolutely no reason that the bodies can't talk to each other. So that gives, like, sort of the pages of the world and others that are like, why are we talking about this? An opportunity to understand that, like, well, we are, it's just sort of happening in a different space for now. So that's another idea that I had come to mind as we were having this discussion earlier.
We must be.
I agree with that approach.
I was kind of comically linked. I was thinking the same thing. We should be talking with them. And I think also our partners at the state legislature and the government would probably like it to see that we're not siloed and that we're kind of sharing some common conversations. So I think that's a great suggestion. Mr. Morgan.
I think this is a discussion that we're going to have. And I think there's one piece, Commissioner Tisdale, I think you're right on track there with the amount of resources that are required to have a control burn. The area that I don't think is being addressed, at least in my experience, is there's a great deal of planning goes on federal forests for what happens after you get a natural start. They do a great deal of planning on what they're going to let burn or not let burn, or their policies. And they need a lot more direction or control or resources, because what happens is their let burn policies or their where they're going to draw the line oftentimes has huge implications for the county and the state level. And there's a lot of failures there. And I think, being that this is a state organization or essentially group here today, the feds are our partners and we have to get along there. But there's a piece in there that people look at controlled burns and they look at wildfire, and they don't look at what I call not wasting a good wildfire when they're going to get management work done with it. And I think there's a real important piece there.
Yeah, and there's even more crossover areas between federal and state and local coming out of this than we realized. Even dispatch is one that we talked extensively about and is covered in this FLA, is making sure that the interagency dispatch and the local dispatch are trained about how to cross over calls and they don't get dropped when a landowner who sees a fire doesn't know which one to call. And that it goes, that crossover area goes everywhere. But I agree with Director McCombs that let's coordinate, or let's seed the initial discussion to Fire Commission on this, so it doesn't get muddy and the paths are clear.
Yeah.
And that we simply ask from the Forest Health Council perspective for an update when the time is right. I think that the time is it's a little young conversation right now. It's just taking form. So.
That's great. And so I'm going to have Angela speak, but first I'd like to say we're out of time, but I'd like to have one more kind of semi-vote and bring this question up, but I'm going to have Angela go ahead and speak. But if you don't leave yet, I need you all to vote on possibly something. Thank you.
I was just going to clarify, Director McCombs or Commissioner Tisdale, do you sort of have an approximate idea of when the conversation might be mature enough for them to come brief us? Are we thinking January? Are we thinking April? Later than that?
We've had 2 meetings that are kind of wide-ranging and loose discussions, I would characterize so far. Maybe we've had 3. We have another one coming up. I would guess January would be possible, but maybe sometime between January and April. Maybe February would be a great time.
Great. So
sorry, Commissioner McNally, I was also going to ask, who's the other phone number? We've got Christy on the phone. Who's the other phone number?
Christy is 7885. That's what I end in, just FYI.
who's the 06 and again 06?
This is me, Selwyn White Skunk from the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe.
Oh, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We're glad to have you here. Thank you. We're really glad to have you here. So 2 things. Courtney, if you could put in the chat again, the dates for suggested for, I'm sorry, I hope you don't mind me saying, could you do this? But I just want to make sure we're kind of thinking about those future dates. I thought I had screenshotted it last time, and as you know, our schedules, or at least my schedule, is crazy, wackadoodle, kind of trying to tessellate everything. But this is a priority for me. And my next question is: we had a pretty productive and pretty consensus-building conversation on recommendations for these bills. Do we feel that they're detailed enough to bring to our Forest Health Council meeting because we have to have a debrief? Or I think I'm presenting on the 20th, maybe just an update from our council. So I was wondering if we could take a vote that these are our initial comments or additions or concerns. Do we want to take a vote so that we can kind of share our initial kind of
Yeah, Jody, I think it
recommendation.
would be good use of our time to capture the direction and we can reference it. And it didn't seem like there was any disagreement from this quorum attending today on the positions and direction on the topics.
So I welcome a motion to ask staff to bring our discussion on those first three bills of our recommendations for suggested amendments or changes or edits to the full council for our next meeting to present.
I
welcome.
was so moved. And it looks like Angela's got that ready to go.
And second,
I'll second. Oh,
Whoever you all want.
I will do Samantha. Any further discussion? Great. Well, all those in favor to present that, for me to present that as our update from our legislative council, say aye.
All right.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you for passing that. Then we have something kind of formal to kind of show that we've very excited and moving forward. And I think it's great that we all are kind of on the same page and consensus. Thank you all for your work and time. I know we went over today, but I think we got a lot done and I appreciate everyone's time and service. And the next question is, do we want to, we have the Forest Health Council meeting and then we've been trying to meet every 2 weeks. Do we feel like we could skip a meeting and wait for a month? I feel like we're kind of waiting to see how this full council does. We don't really have, sounds like we don't have any really other big items. Can we take a little break and we in a month?
Sounds great.
Angela, Courtney, do you guys have any concerns about that, just as far as process?
No, I think we're in a little bit of slow period before ledge session starts.
Oh, man, we have to miss a meeting.
On a Friday? Boo!
Oh, man, bummer.
All right, so we're gonna, we'll meet in a month and I will just kind of send out an agenda early. And then if you have some suggestions or something, a burning desire, please forward that to Courtney, because I'm not sure, I guess, can they suggest items for the agenda to me directly? Is that okay to do for open meeting laws? And then once you send it to me, and then I will, I won't respond, but you can send it to me and I'll, and then thank you, Angela. Then we can, if there's some big idea for the agenda, I can balance that with some other things coming up because we might have some discussion after the Forest Health Council meeting. So anyway, thank you all. Enjoy this beautiful weekend and appreciate everyone's time and all the robust conversation. So take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for everybody's hard work on this.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. It's always